All right, welcome to Career Conversations for this month, and we are excited to have our uh, guest panelists with us, Scott Davert, and Lori Scharf is going to be our interviewer. And as we do with many career conversations, we will begin with the interview and getting to know you, and then we will open it up to you, our audience, to ask questions of our guests. So good afternoon, Lori. Good afternoon, Scott. Also on the panel is Katie and Lee, who will also may be asking some follow-up questions. And Lori, take it away.
Okay, thank you. I would like to introduce Scott Davert, and Scott currently is the coordinator for the technology. Let's see, I'm going to mess this up. Technology Research and Innovation Center at Helen Keller National Center. And Scott, why don't you begin by telling us a little about what the Technology Research and Innovation Center is, and also a little bit about yourself and the journey that has taken you to that job.
Sure. Well, thanks, Lori, and good evening or afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are. Well, first of all, Lori, I have to say that you are a liar because you didn't mess it up. You did it exactly correct. So congratulations. And that's not an easy one to remember. So we often just call it trick, TRIC. There's no K on the end. We hope there's magic happening, but maybe. Anyway, the Technology Research and Innovation Center at HKNC has a lot of different things that we do. One of them, probably most relevant to people in this audience, is that we provide short-term technology training for people who have both vision and hearing loss. So that short-term training could mean the person comes to Long Island, where we are located, or it could be done virtually. It really just depends on the circumstances that people find themselves in. And typically funding comes from Voc Rehab. So we have that going on with short-term training, and it can be anywhere from 1 week or a day up to 3 weeks. You know, a lot of times we have situations where people are already working, but they may have a new piece of technology. So, you know, they can only get a couple of weeks off of work. So we do intense technology training for those individuals. The other things we do are, and by we, I say mostly me. I have an administrative assistant, but I'm otherwise my own department at this point. Some of the other stuff that I do in this current job, I work a lot with technology companies to try to help improve the accessibility of their products for individuals who have vision and hearing loss. And that can look like any number of things. It depends on the company. You know, I have some dialogue with APH, obviously, and I work with Apple on a lot of the things that we do are working to improve not only the things that are designed for either blindness or deafness, but also the mainstream things, like I said, Apple and to some extent Microsoft and Google and others. And sorry, I had to mute my speech. There we go. So the thing we do there is not only reviewing products and giving people feedback, but I also work on writing articles to educate the public or anyone who's interested really in the devices that I've been working with. And so that's another thing that I do in this department, is not only working with the companies, but developing somewhat in collaboration with them articles. And by collaboration, I don't mean I won't write it if they don't approve it. Certainly I would never, that's never my philosophy. However, everyone makes mistakes. No one's perfect. I'm like the anti-perfect. And so I understand that, things happen, things can be inaccurately represented, or, and this is probably my favorite part of doing this stuff, is when a company says, yeah, you're right. We didn't realize that that was an issue. So we are going to go back and address that. And if you don't mind, give us another week or so to fix the issue, and then, write it in your article accordingly. So, and I won't let it go on forever, but I really try to work with companies to not only give them feedback, but also to hopefully put a more positive light on whatever it is they are uh, offering, whether it's a service or a Braille device or software or whatever it may be. So it's kind of two goals wrapped into one. I also do quite a bit of training internally with staff at the Helen Keller National Center, any kind of adaptive technology stuff, if it's related to their work or their work with their consumers, I will do my best to try to support them. It ranges anywhere from orientation to devices to full on, here's how you use this feature, here's how you use that feature. It just depends on the situation. And I also do train the trainers webinars for professionals in the field. This is not one of those webinars, but I did one earlier today, actually, for trainers on ways to assess people for Braille displays and, tips and tricks on making them as effective as possible. And then I reviewed, what was it, 8 or 9 different Braille devices for some of their different features. And so that was my webinar I did earlier today. So that's a bit about what I do. I also travel around when I get the chance. I went to CSUN this past year. Well, it's actually this year still, a few months ago. And that's another part of the job that I really enjoy. And the reason I really enjoy that is because I feel like in an environment like that, I'm around a lot of the people of my own kind, so to speak, with the same goals in mind, really, using technology to make people more independent, which is really what I've been about most of my life. I was born blind in Michigan and started losing hearing. Well, I got my first set of hearing aids when I was in junior high, but prior to that, by a few years, I actually had what I would call normal hearing, if I ever had such a thing. I used to use a lot of echolocation to navigate around my environment, whether that was just running around my parents' backyard or I used to bike around the neighborhood a lot. So, I really just did my best to fit in with whatever was going on around me. And as I started to lose more hearing, I had no idea just how much that philosophy would really shape what I ended up doing career-wise. And I say that because as I started losing hearing, and for those of you who have gone through that yourself, or I understand, like from a psychological perspective, it does have some similarities with losing vision in the sense that you're still losing something. It's a constant battle because some days are better than others, first of all. But second of all, you're dealing with something that goes in stages. So what happens is you'll lose, in my case anyway, I'd lose some hearing and I would eventually figure out, oh, well, I can't detect that anymore with my hearing. And so what I end up having to do is trying to find a way auditorily. I don't even know if that's a word. If it's not, I guess it is now. But I try to find ways to accommodate for my hearing loss. For example, boiling water on the stove. You can hear it bubbling, of course. I used to as well. Now I just put my hand on the pan handle and I can feel whether it's bubbling that way. So that's just a very basic example of one of the things that I had to learn to do. And the other thing I did growing up when I started losing more hearing was I got into ham radio. And the reason I did that was because, if I couldn't hear somebody, I could blame it on the static on the radio or something like that. And I also had volume control. So, I had complete control over who I was communicating with the added advantage of they couldn't really judge me as someone with a disability if they didn't know I had it to begin with. So that's a little bit about my past. I think that's kind of where you were going.
Lori?
Did I get muted?
You probably did. Yep.
Did.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know that. Or I muted myself and forgot. Okay, so what I was saying was, what are some aspects of your job that you really enjoy doing? And what are some aspects of your job that you wish maybe you had to do less of? Not that they're unpleasant, but that you wish you didn't have to do maybe as much of.
Going to work. It'd be nice to just pick up an income. No, I'm kidding. So, some of the things I like I mentioned before, going to CSUN and really working with companies to help them improve products, and also, working with people that have vision and hearing loss, or maybe one or the other. I really enjoy the people aspect of it, and I also enjoy seeing people. Sorry.
You're fine, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I also really enjoy just seeing people improve their lives, whether I had anything to do with it or not. It's always good to see that. It's always really rewarding. For example, there have been a few students who I had come in contact with in the past in various capacities. And essentially, they didn't really have anything. I remember one specific situation where someone had a really bad vehicle accident, lost all of his hearing and vision, and it took quite a long time. He was with HKNC for quite a while, and he had to learn to sign. He had to learn Braille. He had to learn how to use his sign language to communicate with different kinds of people. There are different kinds of signers, the same way you have different accents, and just had really no idea of how to do things from a deafblind perspective. And he had gone from fully sighted and fully hearing to not having either in a second. And I get emails from him from time to time. He posts things on Facebook, and it's nice and wonderful to me to know that the agency was able to get him back on his feet and get him back into life. And it was also great because he was able to, even send me an email or get on Facebook. He was even telling me not long before he left that, he feels like he's slowly getting his life back. And, those types of things are what really make my day, getting an email from someone and who, thanks in part to my teaching and also the teaching of others, is able to really succeed. So what don't I like? Paperwork. But does anybody like paperwork? I don't really know anybody who's like, oh, dude, I can't wait to sit down and write that report. It is going to be so awesome. That said, it's a job, right? So there's going to be things that you might not enjoy so much, or that you're just like, I have to do that. Yeah. Well, that's why they have to pay people, right? They have to pay people to do those parts of the job that they don't necessarily enjoy. So, that's kind of what I try and keep in mind when doing all that wonderful paperwork is, well, this is just something that has to happen. So I can either sit around and not get it done and put it off and regret it, or I can get it done, get it turned in, and then I don't have to worry about it until the next report's due. think you're muted again,
I think you
Lori.
need to unmute. Yep.
I don't know why that keeps happening.
So Lori, just when you talk, we are hearing a little bit of background noise when you're
Oh,
not muted.
okay.
So I don't know if you're using a headset or not, but we are hearing some
Nope.
background. So I think we tried to mute you for the recording. So it's
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll mute. Then I know I'm muted.
Yes.
What could you talk about the importance of technology in the workplace, from both the training side and the importance of training somebody well on technology, and also as a consumer, why it's important to learn technology to help you do your job?
Sure. I'll see if I can remember all that. So, why is technology important in the workplace? Well, it's important to help you do your job more independently. I use a braille display like pretty much every minute I have to interact with any kind of technology that allows me to do that. Kiosks, unfortunately, are not one of those areas, but that's another story for another time. But a lot of it is just increasing your independence and being able to communicate with your coworkers and do these types of things. And from a consumer's perspective, I mean, it's important to learn because everybody's using technology, or most people are, in their places of employment. It could just be using email, maybe, depending on the job you hold. But for a lot of jobs, especially in my type of situation, there's a lot of technology in use all the time. Computers, braille displays, hearing aids. I have a device that takes the audio from my computer and sends it directly to my hearing aids. And I have something called an assistive listening device, which is essentially a microphone that I can hand to somebody. And again, it sends a direct signal to my hearing aid. So for example, when everything gets amplified, and that does include, voices, but it includes all the other noises around, people can still communicate with me. So from my perspective, it's really used a lot for communication purposes in all different kinds of ways. A lot of people I know who also dread paperwork, have to use technology just to be able to do the job, and from a person's perspective, such as myself, I would say that in some ways, learning technology, especially if it's not something you excel at, is a big challenge, but it's something that you really have to embrace to the extent you can, whether you like it or not. The world is currently running on a lot of technology. For example, Zoom, which we're using at the moment. So, yeah, it's always good to keep up with it and to keep up with the changes, which is really what got me into this career in the first place. I was like, well, it's very beneficial for me to keep up with this as a person, but why don't I just turn it into my job? So then that way I can make sure that I know what's going on personally, but also so that I can hopefully help others to keep up with it as well. So from a trainer's perspective, it can be very challenging to get people where they need to be for various reasons, some of which have nothing to do with the person's ability so much as they do lack of awareness on the part of developers for software and websites and things like that. However, another reason to learn the technology is so that, if possible, maybe you can work around whatever the issue is, even if it's only a temporary workaround. If you can find a way around a hurdle, even if it's only temporary, I highly recommend doing that. And of course, the way you do that is by being familiar with all different kinds of technology that are in whatever field you want to be in, or I guess I should say, whatever position you currently hold. And that's going to be different for everyone. But what I will say to kind of sum up my answer is that technology is something that even if you dread, you unfortunately still have to do your best to keep up with. And that includes even applying for jobs. You know, everything now has primarily gone online for the initial application. So even to do something like that, you know, it requires the use of technology in some way, shape, or form. I think did I answer that correctly?
You did
Or
fine.
all of it? Okay.
Yep. And just for my last question before we turn it over to Katie, Richard, and Lee for their questions, and I'd like to remind the audience, you can type your questions into the chat, and Katie will be reading those in a few moments. My final question is, what would be your words of wisdom to people entering a similar field as yourself, or just in general?
Don't you have to be wise to have wisdom? Well, I guess my words of wisdom in general and also in specific cases of careers kind of like mine, a lot of it is really coming back to networking and doing as much as you can yourself. You know, resources are great. Voc Rehab or other resources, depending on your state, they're great. But ultimately, the one who is going to be most invested in your success is you. And that's the way it should be, you know. And these resources are great. They're wonderful. But at the end of the day, you have to find what works for you. Ultimately, if you aren't happy in your job, you're probably not going to be happy in other parts of your life. So, you know, don't be afraid either. Get out there and do what you can. Interact with people. If you can't go to conferences and stuff, get on LinkedIn, which is, I know, primarily professional in nature, but that's the whole point, you know. And maybe if you have a specific field you're interested in, reach out to people in that field. Send them a message and explain, hey, you know, I'm interested in your career. I'm wondering if I can ask you some questions, and, you know, obviously have questions ready, and kind of go from there. Just reach out. And by doing that, you also start learning from other people. Textbooks are nice. They do serve a purpose. For some people, it's napping, but they do serve purposes, but they're not the end all. And life experience is extremely important. And making those professional connections is, I would say, equally important. It's how a lot of people learn about jobs that are available.
Okay, and Richard, we'll turn it over to you and Katie and Lee for questions.
Fantastic. Lee or Katie or Lee, do you have any questions for Scott?
Katie, would you like to go first?
Say that again, Lee.
I just asked Katie if she would like to go first.
Sorry, your audio is really low, Lee.
Yeah, he asked Katie if she wanted to go and ask you a question before he did.
Oh, sorry.
You're okay.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Really, hey, Scott, it's good to talk to you again and be with you. My main question is really for the participants on the call, thinking of either students or people who are going into the workforce and those instructors who are teaching them, what one piece of advice would you give for either a student who is experiencing hearing loss, vision loss, or a combination? What best piece of advice from your life experience would you give for them? And what best piece of advice would you give for an instructor who's working with them?
One piece of advice for all those people?
Absolutely. There's got to be one overarching thing that you've encountered in your life that you thought would be most important.
Really, I guess it would be to not give up. And I know that's cliche, but I could tell you from my own experience, and I'm sure probably most of the people on this call can, you know, persistence is what pays off. And yes, as somebody with a disability, there are often times that independence means working harder than people who don't have a disability. We don't have to like it, but that doesn't make it go away. You know, you really need to understand that unfortunately, yeah, things do take longer when you have a disability. And, you know, if you want to be part of the society and you want to be in the working world, sometimes that's just how it is, you know. I wish there was a nicer way to put it, but at the end of the day, that's it. You know, you just have to do your best and keep trying, you know, reach out, make connections. That would be my overall piece of advice.
All right, great. Thanks, Scott.
All right. Well, I know that we do have some questions in the chat, and we will see if Katie can get some of those questions for us.
Sure. So we have a question about a person is wondering about using Braille displays in the workplace, and particularly as it relates to individuals who are coding, wondering if you know any coders who are blind or low vision, and how do they best use technology in the workplace?
The one guy I know who he's low vision, hard of hearing, or at least he was last I knew, who does programming, uses a Mac and uses a Braille display and does a lot of that. You know, kind of challenge. He says it's very challenging, which makes sense to me. You know, for example, one line of Braille. Although thankfully we're starting to move beyond that now, thanks in part to APH. But the challenge he had was exactly that. You know, multi-line displays allow him to look at multiple lines of code, which is important. You know, you can't you can't program very well when it's only one line. I mean, you can do it, but he said it's very time consuming because he has to depend on the Braille, which only gives him one line at a time. But he said it's a heck of a lot better than nothing because, you know, his employer does work with him. This goes back to what I said a little earlier about sometimes things take longer. And that's what he was telling me, you know, it takes him longer because of what he's reading, and he wasn't the fastest Braille reader. So it took him longer to get the same job done as his counterparts. But, you know, he persisted and did it. And as far as I know, he's still working at where he was working. Let me see, what was this, about 12 years ago? So, you know, I guess he's successful.
Great. Next, we have a question. We have a student who is deaf-blind, and they are wondering if there is any live captioning software that they can read on their Braille display during lectures or instructions.
It depends on the platform. Like the Zoom captioning with a Braille display is pretty challenging. You know, there's the live captions through Apple, which has a lot of Braille issues. Really, the only thing I've found that has been very consistent and that allows me as a Braille reader to control how fast the text is going is either through a transcript or CART. Communication access in real time is what it stands for. And but it comes with its own challenges, but it's a lot more workable than any of the other things that we have currently, as far as from my experience. You know, Stream Text is one of those services that a lot of captioning folks are using, which works fine on Windows, but it does not work so well either on Android or the iPhone. So, and you know, things like Zoom, Google Meet, all those kinds of things, I have not had really any success with when I'm trying to do more than read a few words at the beginning of, you know, whenever the captioning started. So CART, which is where we've been for quite a while, is still what seems to work best for Braille readers.
Great. We have some good questions coming in tonight on deaf blindness. A question here, are there virtual support groups to discuss deaf blind technology?
Well, there is a mailing list that I'm no longer on, but I was on before. I believe it's a Google group called DB Techies. It's all one word, DB TECHIES. There's a group on Facebook. I'd have to look up the name because it's a really long name. But the short answer is yes, they do exist. Are there a lot of them? Not really, not specifically focusing on technology.
All right. Next, every time I mute, my Braille display moves, so I'm having a little bit of challenging here. We have a young adult who will be seeking work soon, and they are going to be an office assistant or a coordinator. And they also have some processing challenges with hearing and seeing. So the audio processing affects them in crowds or noisy conditions. It asks, does your center have sensory processing, or does it deal with sensory processing or just hearing loss?
I'm sorry, what? I got what we're talking about, but I didn't quite get the question. Can you just repeat the question part for me?
So they're wondering if they're saying that asking if the center helps with people with sensory processing challenges or just with complete hearing loss at HKNC.
Now, don't quote me on this because it may not be true. And if you want to contact me at my work address, I can get a better reply for you, or at least verify that I'm correct in what I'm saying. Most of the folks have some functional form of vision and hearing loss. I have not worked with too many people with audio processing disorders. However, that doesn't mean they're not valid and that they're not worth, people getting everything they count out of life, obviously. But let me check on that. I don't know if there's a way I can leave my email address with you guys at APH, or if there's some way we can do that. But like I said, I don't want to go ahead and say that that's their official position because I'm not in a position to officially say so. So there's your preamble and your post disclaimer, but I will check into that.
Great. Next, we have a question from someone asking, what kind of Braille display do you use?
Is this an APH commercial?
And they're also wondering what other Braille equipment you use, labels, Perkins Braille Writer. So, promote away.
Well, yeah, I have a Perkins Brailler. I don't really use it anymore. I used to use it when I taught Braille, though. I used to develop my own exercises for students, and I actually used to have fun with that when I wasn't stressed out about other stuff. But to answer the question, I mean, I use two different Braille displays. The one I have here in front of me is the Mantis Q40. Some of you may have heard of it, and I love it. Now, is that what's going to work best for everybody? No. Just because that's what Scott Davert uses, or that's what Stevie Wonder uses, or that's what whoever uses, doesn't mean it's going to be perfect for everybody. And then for portable use, for all intents and purposes, it might as well be a chameleon. But I do have the Brilliant BI-20X. And at the moment, I am doing a little bit of research on an iOS beta. So I also have a Focus 14 here, and that belongs to the department, but I need it to finish doing what I need to do to report it. So would I choose the Brilliant / Chameleon over the Focus? I guess that would depend on my situation or your situation. You know, there are some bugs in iOS that make the Chameleon and Brilliant displays a little challenging to use right now, especially if you're a power user. There's some issues with keyboard commands and not being able to carry out things like select all, copy, cut, and paste directly from the keyboard. There are workarounds for these things, but it can be kind of a pain.
I understand, and I'm actually using my Mantis to read the chat and participate tonight as well. So another happy Mantis user.
Absolutely.
So another question here about, you mentioned earlier about the CART services, and we have a question asking if there is training for how to obtain that and how to use CART, how people can get that service.
So are you talking about, well, maybe you don't know, you were reading the question. I'm just assuming perhaps I missed part of it. So the question is two questions, actually. How would you go about using CART, and how would you become someone who delivers CART services, right?
Correct.
Well, that's something that I've done in the past, is train people on how to use it. You know, a lot of it is really a bit of a challenge. I don't know how many, do we have a lot of questions behind this one, Katie, or can I go into a little detail?
You can go in, we have a couple more. So,
okay.
Yep.
Okay. So I'll just tell you my setup. And this is what currently is working for me. And I have to put emphasis on currently because things change in the technology space constantly. What I do is I actually have to use, like when I go to a Zoom meeting, two different devices. I have typically something I'm reading the captioning on, and then if I want to use the Zoom part, I have to go to my other Braille display and raise my hand or unmute my audio. So it's a bit of a challenge. In terms of using CART, I mean, it's basically a matter of pulling up a web page, and if whoever has designed that page has done so conforming to accessibility standards, it should work with Braille. In terms of how to become an individual who does CART, I don't have details on that. I know that, you know, it involves obviously typing a lot. I know some folks use voice recognition software from their own voice, that's trained to their own voice to help with the captioning. Because in the end, it's kind of the same process, CART, and like Zoom captioning kind of is CART, but it's just unfortunately not accessible with a Braille display. So to get back to doing the actual CART work, I don't have a clear answer on that for sure, because I don't know how accessible it is. I know that TypeWell, which is a program that was often in use, was not accessible, but that was 5 years ago, so that may have changed. I hope it has. I really do. I think you might be muted, Katie.
There we go. Yes.
There you are. I couldn't tell if you were muted or if you were signing. Either way, it doesn't work. But you're good to go now.
All right. So next we have someone with a question that a deafblind coworker asked if there is a way to scan a document and get Braille output instead of audio output.
There's a lot of ways. It just really depends on, you know, like you have solutions like the Pearl camera with OpenBook although OpenBook isn't really as widely used anymore because JAWS itself can do that. You have solutions on the iPhone as well. I don't really know of a great solution on the Mac at the moment, but yes, there are certainly ways, depending on what you're using, to convert the printed text to digital text. With one caveat, it's still challenging for these systems to recognize any kind of handwriting. Sometimes it gets it, sometimes not. It's really a challenge with handwriting. But yes, the technology is out there and it works pretty well. It just depends on what operating system you're using and all that as far as how you would go about accomplishing the task.
And I am not seeing any more questions in the chat at the moment.
We do have a few more minutes if folks do want to put a question in the chat. And we can also ask our panelists, Lori, Lee, and others if they want to follow up.
This is Lori. So if you, Scott, can describe a little, because I think there may be some misunderstandings about CART versus captions. Very often people think they are the same thing. So maybe you could speak to the differences and also a little about how in particular there may be issues with the Braille display.
I'll answer that to the degree I can. So it's my understanding that the difference is that the captions kind of they pop up and they're gone. But you have situations where that gets a little blurry as far as captioning versus CART. For example, as far as I know, the captioning appearing on Zoom right now would be the same that would go through CART. So what I can tell you from a Braille display user perspective is that unfortunately at the moment, none of the captioning services that are not utilizing something like CART are not fully, they're not really fully compatible no matter what they are. All the ones I've tried, they have some degree of accessibility, but really CART is where it's still at. I'm guessing it may be because of the web page format. I'm really not sure. From my perspective as a user and as someone who trains people, I just know what works and doesn't work. And unfortunately, at the moment, the captioning through Zoom and stuff like that is not working for various reasons. And so, unfortunately, as far as I know, the web page with CART loaded is pretty much the only way a Braille display user has a chance to really work with the text themselves. Part of that has to do with the way your screen reader takes in the text and processes it. With some systems and other systems, it's the way the screen reader is interpreting the captioning. So for example, with the iPhone, if you're using the Zoom captioning, what happens when you turn that on is that the captions are delivered through flash messages or voiceover announcements. For those who are familiar with iOS, but maybe not those announcements, those are the things that pop up that have a full cell at the beginning and end that say things. Well, one example is voiceover hints. Those are announcements. I mean, there's other stuff that uses it, obviously, and captioning through Zoom is one of those ways. And so when captioning is enabled, the text flashes up and it's gone. It flashes up and it's gone, and it continues to do that. And as a very fast Braille reader, I can at least make sense of it sometimes. But if I was a slower Braille reader, or if I had another task I was trying to do at the same time, it just doesn't do what it's supposed to. In terms of stream text, which is another way of getting the information, I don't know on the back end of this stuff how it's all configured. Like I said, I just know what works and doesn't. Stream text is an interesting animal because what it will do is, let's say you go in, it's again through a web page, typically stream text is. So when you're reading, when you come to the end of the text, you're taken out of that body of text, which you would think, okay, no big deal. I'll pan left a little and keep reading. But because screen readers are treating this text as one element, even though visually there's paragraphs and stuff, when you go backward to pick up new captions, you're at the very beginning of the captioning. So for example, let's say I'm reading 10 minutes worth of captioning and I'm finally caught up and I go back. Now, when I go back, there'll be new text there, but I'll have to scroll all the way through all of it, 10 minutes worth of people talking in text format to get to where I was. So it really, all these different options have different but equally challenging barriers to access. And part of the issue there is that we don't have a lot of Braille users who are using these services. We have some of them are here in this meeting, but because it's such a small market, it means we have a smaller voice. And so it's unfortunately one of those where there's a lot more advocacy that has to take place because we're in the deafblind community, a very diverse and also a very niche part of the population. I would say more so than the deaf population or the blind population, because you have, both vision and hearing loss. So, that's kind of the challenge that we're tasked with. Is there are not a whole lot of people doing the research. There are not a whole lot of people who are working in this field who have a real passion for deaf blindness and technology. So it means those who are part of it and who agree to try to make a difference have a lot of work on their plate. So if any of you out there are struggling with captioning, first of all, I'm sorry. Second of all, I understand how you feel. And finally, we have to speak up and let people know when these challenges arise. Otherwise, they can either be ignorant or pretend they're ignorant and never address them.
Well, thank you, Scott. I think we have time for one final question, which I think we see there in the chat box. Katie? And I think it had to do with reasonable accommodations. 1 second. Let me see if I can find it.
I got it. I'm
got it? Okay.
having some technical difficulty tonight, but the question asks is, does the Helen Keller National Center have any camp programs for youth?
Do they have any programs for what?
For youth, young people?
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yes, mostly transition aged. So, when you start getting services through Voc Rehab, some states that's 14, some it's 16. I think that's the majority of them, 14 and 16. Then, you would be eligible to come to HKNC. And we do have, transition programs for people going from high school to college. Or, high school directly to work. I mean, depending on what the person's preferences are and what they're looking to get out of it. And that's one thing I will say for HKNC is we do almost entirely one-on-one instruction. Excuse me. And the reason we do that is because everyone has different communication preferences. And so, a lot of the time, I know from my own perspective, being in a group class for people who were blind, who had normal hearing, it's tough. It's really tough. So we try not to do too many group classes and things like that. So we do a lot of one-on-one training, and that is starting typically at age 16. So like we don't do anything with, elementary school kids or early middle school.
And I believe that is the last question.
I'll check with our
We-
panelists again. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Katie.
No, we had someone, Scott, I don't know if you're on LinkedIn, but someone wondered if they could find you on LinkedIn.
Or if you have a public presence on some social media.
I don't know the link to my LinkedIn profile. You would think I would, right? I'm certainly on there if you search for me. Was that the question about my LinkedIn? I'm sorry.
Yes, if you have a LinkedIn,
Oh,
if people can find you there.
you should be able to find me just by searching for my name, and it should come up. I've never tried searching for myself actually on LinkedIn. I've Googled myself before, but I've never
Or
looked on LinkedIn.
alternatively, could people find you through HKNC?
Yeah. And I'll go ahead and give my email address. Is that okay?
As long as it's public, or because these are archived and recorded, so we just avoid personal information. But that's up to you. If you want to share your work email or work phone number, or any way you want folks to get a hold of you.
Yeah, I'll just give my email. And if people do email me, understand that I'm not always in the office. I'm actually working part-time to help out another department at the moment. So I'm sometimes in the office, sometimes not, which is the way I like it. I love traveling. Anyway, my email is sdavert, S-D as in Delta, A-V as in Victor, E-R-T as in Tom, at helenkeller.org. And Helen Keller is HELENKELLER.
Okay, well, thank you for coming this evening, Scott, and thank you everybody for participating in career conversations. And we will now pause the recording, and Katie will be giving the closing code for ACV REP credit. And please be aware that the link to obtain ACV REP credit is also in the chat.